What's up? I am David Long, Quarantine Q&A. You know what it is. How y'all doing? I'm not really gonna be on here like this the whole time. What's up, Matthew? How you doing? I'm glad to be here, hanging out with y'all. What's up, David? How you doing, man? Hope you're doing well, brother. Hope everybody's doing well. Tough times, you know? A lot of people out of a job. I'm kind of still on a break, you know, like a video break, a Q&A break. Some of y'all might not know, but yeah, towards the end of last year, I said that I was going to take a break because I'm behind on videos and I need to catch up. So I'm still behind on videos and I'm still trying to catch up, but I figured I probably need to come in and hang out with y'all a little bit more. So it looks like we got a bunch of good questions on this post that I made in the group about the Q's and A's. So let's jump into some of those. Let's see. I think I might start with Eric Davis's post on here. He's asking me some questions about this recent talk I did on the integral stage. He said, in your recent integral religion clip from the integral stage, you critique the buffet style, many religions focus without discernment, and the conflation style, single religious focus without discernment. You seem to prefer a many religion focus with discernment in the manner of Joseph Campbell. Yeah, that's what I'm pointing to. First question, how about a single religion focus with discernment in the manner of Wilbur, Buddhism, or Paul Smith, Christianity? In other words, you seem to be critical of the single focus approach, but is it possible to have a primary focus while retaining discernment? This is a great question, and I thought I kind of made this clear, but you know, this is going to be a tough one. It's weird. You can talk for like an hour on a subject and feel like you said all the right things and still wonder if like anybody heard what you said. Yeah, it's so, first of all, I don't know who Paul Smith is, so I can't speak on his version of Christianity. But Wilbur's version of the single religion focus with Buddhism is not good because, again, it's that conflation style. It's not a single religion focus with discernment. So, like, again, integral is about integrating diversity with discernment. So you can't have a single focused tradition with discernment because your discernment is not going to be good. If you only have one symbol set to be able to understand and reference reality, you're going to have a very limited perspective on reality. It's just as simple as that. Maybe I can come back around with a bigger perspective at the end. Let me say a little bit more about this. So, can you do a single religion with discernment? Well, I think you can take on a tradition with discernment. I think you can go down a spiritual path with discernment. I think that's kind of what he's saying here, is like, can you take on one set of practices? Can you go down a spiritual path and just do it with discernment? Again, I think you can, but it's early stage integral stuff. It's not this integrally informed kind of approach because, again, it's still a personal approach to religion. Can I do it for me? Could I do it? This talk was about the future of integral religion and how we were going to do it on a large scale, right? So I'm not even necessarily talking about can you do it as an individual on an individual path. It's like, yeah, you can, but at that point you're doing religion for you, and I'm talking about the project of having a religion for the whole spiral. So in that context, in the context of religion for the whole spiral, of course, every tradition is transcended and included, and you can go down a particular path and like focus on a particular symbol set in a larger context, realizing that it is just one way of talking about things, that it's not the whole thing. You really have to transcend and include this tradition. Like, you really have to understand this is just one way of talking about things. And it's probably wrong. Like, Buddhism is wrong. Christianity is wrong. Any tradition you can point to, any symbol set that you can point to is wrong. It is limited. It is not enough. It is partial. It is reductionist. It is an incorrect worldview. All of them, including science. If you want to talk about, man, I'm going to get in trouble for this one. But I mean, like, this is the argument between Peterson and Sam Harris, right? Is that sometimes Sam Harris takes the objective truth to be the absolute truth. And it's not. It's just the most accurate relative system that we have. Now, maybe I need to qualify this a little bit more. You have like absolute truth and relative truth, right? And then subcategories of relative truth are objective truth and subjective truth, because you have to speak about your subjective truth or your objective truth in relative human language. So when I say that none of them are true, like what I'm saying is it's all poetry. It's all we have is poetry to talk about anything. So if you're attached to one symbol set, you are heading down this road to where you are getting lost in this reductionist, particular kind of wrong view. So that's something that we need to be careful of. We can't collapse down into this conflationist kind of approach. Okay, second question. Where is the division of knowledge and division of labor in your approach? Division of knowledge, and does it embrace diversity in the synergy it can bring? It seems as though you want everyone to be everything, as the saying goes, chase many rabbits, catch none. First of all, this whole chase many rabbits, catch none thing, I don't think is true. I think every integralist I know has caught the Buddhist rabbit, dissected it, taken it apart, put it back together again, caught the Christian rabbit, dissected it. Like, many of us have caught many rabbits. Most integralists, people at these stages of development, they have researched multiple traditions. Now, we might know more about some traditions than other traditions, but to act like you can't, this whole like chase many rabbits, catch none philosophy is coming from the perspective that you need to like be a part of a tradition so that way you can really follow its spiritual practices, so that way you can really get to this illumination. You have to like really work hard to like get to this point to where you can achieve the awakening of these traditions. Like, it's coming from again a particular bias about what religion is and what it's supposed to be doing. This statement is coming from a perspective of seeing religion from the perspective of a single mountaintop, and thinking, oh, you have to achieve this spiritual awakening through a lineage, through a tradition, to really be practicing. And frankly, I don't think that's true. I don't think religion is about Satori. So, yeah, I think that's coming from a biased, limited perspective in the first place. And I think actually what I'm talking about is better. If you have this meta perspective, this meta framework, that helps you to look at and to integrate all these traditions from a bigger perspective, you can catch many rabbits. And actually, every rabbit that you catch is going to be better, because you're not going to be like, this is the one rabbit. Maybe that's not the best extension of that metaphor. What's up, Joey? Hope you're doing well, brother. But, again, what I'm saying is, I think that you can actually, from this meta perspective, get universal things from different religions, and actually even get the universal rabbits better, because they're going to be more clear to you what the like shared peaks are of different traditions or something like that. If we have a better understanding of like what some universal things that religion is doing. What's up, Alyosha? Then, yeah, many trips, many destinations. I like that, yeah. If we have a better understanding of what's happening in like a universal overarching way in religion, then we have a better way of understanding each religion and its strengths and weaknesses. And we can be like, okay, I want to include some meditation practices. Like I'm saying, if you know what all the functions are, if you know what all the universals are, then you have a meta system to be able to integrate in the best of all these traditions. And this whole idea of like you need to really go down one of these spiritual traditions to get the real gold at the heart of it, that you really have to work hard. Like, no, like that's I would say an outdated view on religion, coming from a very particular bias. All right, I'm repeating myself a little bit. The more rabbits you can catch, the more luck you have. Yeah, you get all those. Make like yourself a little necklace of lucky rabbit's foots from all the rabbits that you catch. Okay, let's see what else he's saying. The more background optional, focusing on religion in order to follow a living religious tradition, right? A religious tradition, a living religious tradition, like this idea of a lineage or something like that. People need some immersion within the language, both deep and surface level of the tradition. It's quite difficult, if not impossible, for everyone to become someone like Houston Smith, who explored and lived many traditions. People have different personalities and different focuses and different capacities and limitations. In any case, even Houston Smith had a Christian focus. Yeah, and let me say this. It's actually going to be rare that people make it to an integral stage of development. Most people won't. But most people at an integral stage of development will have a meta-systemic approach to these traditions. And if they don't, they're still approaching religion from a personal perspective. So that's going to be still early first-tier personal approach, right? So it's like when we're talking about these lines of development, the self line is one of these lines. When we talk about ego construct awareness, to be fully in this second-tier perspective is to have a transrational, transpersonal perspective. So the transrational bit is having deconstructed the construct awareness to get to this point where you understand the relative nature of all symbolism. That is construct awareness. And then this transpersonal thing is when you've deconstructed your ego and you've deconstructed your concept of self. And to some extent, you even deconstruct living for yourself. And so from this perspective, it's not even about me anymore. So like when I'm talking about this stuff in this video, I'm talking about the future of an integral religion. So like, again, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about here is still thinking in terms of systems of the past. Like, well, okay, well, how can we work with what we've got? Yeah, right now, let's work with what we've got, you know? Of course, if you personally are going to find value going down one of these paths, maybe it can be a good thing for you personally. But if we're talking about creating a tradition of the future that's not divisive, that's not superstitious, that does this healthy integration, that engages with the whole spiral at every stage and allows for this healthy flow of development, that's a particular kind of project. And that means a meta-systemic approach to these traditions. So a future integral tradition, I think, is going to transcend and include all traditions. Just like I think the future worldwide system is going to transcend and include all previous governance. Like, there are still going to be probably countries and there'll still be local leaders and stuff, but like in future systems, the past as we know it will be dead. Like when India was formed, like before the colonial thing went in, before, you know, white people went in there and set up a bunch of things and did a bunch of stuff, like there wasn't even an India. There were just a bunch of these different little places, and India was this arbitrary line that got drawn around it. But now it's all transcended and included into a larger India. And I think it's going to be like that. The previous small places still exist, but they're subsumed under a larger label with a bigger set of integration and less separateness and more flow between them. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's other examples. This is a part of the problem about talking about this too. Is like, we're talking about it like, well, can you do it? It's like, well, can you do it within what context? Like, yeah, people are going to do this right now because we don't have this future healthy version of integral religion yet. But I'm projecting into the future. I'm talking about the kind of religion of the future we would want to have that would take this next level, big picture, like world-centric approach to religion. Like if we had the integral age, we would be, what's up, Brendan? In the integral age, we're going to be reworking the governance systems. We're going to be reworking education systems. We're going to be reworking religious systems. And it's going to be in this way that's supposed to be open to everyone so it's not divisive. Transcending all these traditions so it's not superstitious or problematic with dogma and all of this stuff. This project that I'm talking about is trying to create a healthy version of religion that is safeguarded against all the past problems of religion. So hopefully that answers some of these questions. I'm going to go grab a liquid beverage. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat, type them all up in there, and we'll get to them. I'm just going to be hanging out with you guys for a while. We're going to keep it real casual. Who else saw that video? Did you guys like that video? The video on the integral stage? Did everybody see that? So I'm going to go grab a drink. Let me know if you saw it in the chat. Oh, you didn't let me know. Okay, let's see what else we got. You got your liquid beverage? Gotta stay hydrated, man. It's important. How you doing, Christopher? You staying well, buddy? Let's see what Alexander has to say here. I'm really interested in some discerning, reclaiming, reframing, finding the baby in the bathwater of various phenomenon that I think could have important, helpful roles in development and shadow work. For example, in various psychotherapy, such as Gestalt, focusing, internal family systems, there is an acknowledgement of parts within our psyche that we have repressed and denied, and these parts tend to seemingly take on a life of their own when rejected in shadow. Yes. These therapeutic frameworks could acknowledge and point to a healing potential of phenomena usually dismissed by science and more upper right-leaning folk, such as channeling, psi, archetypes, angels, and souls. Okay, so these therapeutic frameworks could acknowledge and point to a healing potential of phenomenon usually dismissed by science. So channeling, psi, archetypes, angels, and soul could be used as therapeutic frameworks for healing potential. I'd love to hear your take on reclaiming the symbols and various other phenomenon which could be turned into shadow work and other developmental therapeutic tools within a reframing rather than outright dismissal. So, like, is there a baby in the bathwater to things like channeling, psi, archetypes, angels, and souls? Okay, let me be real sympathetic in my read. Like, honestly, like I think this is something it's good to think about. If you can't say what's good, true, or beautiful about something, then you probably are not qualified to criticize it. This is part of what it is to have an integral perspective. Nothing is fully bad or wrong or bullshit. Like, there's something beautiful, good, and true about everything. Now, it might not be much. Then the harm might outweigh the good, right? So that's something to definitely take into account. But let's talk about what might be a healthy and skillful therapeutic use of some of these things. So channeling, right? Especially in regard to this kind of therapeutic framework that he's talking about, and archetypes. Okay, so I think channeling could be a great thing if you held it transrationally or metaphorically when it came to things like art. Like, imagine if you as an artist are like, okay, I'm going to make this art, but when I do it, I am channeling Michael Jackson. Because the true and beautiful orientation is like a filter of truth. Yeah, and it's like, it's good as a checklist to realize that there's pros and cons to everything. And it's good to ask this question, like, is there a baby in this bathwater? Is there a way that you can apply this thing that could be healthy and good? I think we see this a lot in like rap and stuff like this, is people taking on these internal archetypes, these shadow monsters or whatever, and like speaking to them on the track. You know, like you hear some of these songs where like people are like confronting their demons and they are speaking as their demons and like sharing this kind of stuff on a track, you know, like doing basically like therapy, you know, cleaning out their closet on a track. I think of people like Nicki Minaj, who has these different archetypes. I think of people like Eminem, who has Slim Shady as this kind of demonic shadow archetype or whatever. Now, a lot of this stuff is unconscious, but I think music is a great place to let these archetypes and these voices play out. I use it a lot like that too. I like kind of allow for this conversation between different voices within myself, you know, where like there's the scared, insecure, childlike, hurt self voice that's afraid, you know, I'll bring that voice on and let them talk. And I think that's good because it kind of provides a sympathetic space for people to relate. And then I'll bring in my higher self to comment on that and to bring the solution and to like refocus. And this is also a way for me to create anthems for myself to be able to beat these demons. It's like you can really work out your shadow on a track in this kind of way. And so this is, you know, this is also talking about archetypes. So channeling archetypes. I think there are artistic ways that we can use some of that kind of stuff that could be helpful and good. There's a baby to be had in that bathwater. The psychic abilities thing, is there a way that there's a baby in that bathwater? Could it be used in a therapeutic framework? Like maybe you know, like Alexander, you might want to give some examples yourself as to what you're thinking about some of this stuff. I'd be interested to hear how you think the baby from these bathwaters could be saved. The psychic abilities thing to me is hard because I'm not sure what the transrational use of that is. Maybe it's something more poetic, like if you did get a glimpse of like all of a sudden a random thought of your friend who you love comes into your head and you decide to call them and it makes some kind of a difference, or you feel some kind of a connection. There's nothing wrong with pushing into that. You can do that without superstition. You can feel connected to people across distances because we are connected to these people, the people that we love, people who are close to us. They're in our hearts, they're part of us. So if you get that spidey sense type of tingle about somebody and you think of somebody or something and it makes you want to reach out to them, do it. I made a whole video about soul, self, awakening, ghosts, afterlife, reincarnation, all around the soul thing. So I think if you want to know how to save the baby from the bathwater around that stuff, I would check that out. Angels. Angels. Man. I'm trying real hard to be gracious here. What's up, Michael Slade? Hope you're doing well, brother. Right now we're saving babies from the dirty bathwater. I think angels, I don't know, angels can work kind of poetically still. Maybe if you can think of these angels archetypally or something, maybe there's a way to see people around you as angels, to realize that you have a bunch of angels in your life looking over you, meaning people, like real people in your life, if you want to think of that poetically and metaphorically. If that's helpful to you, to know that you're surrounded by people who love you and are going to take care of you and we're going to do spiritual warfare on your behalf. And maybe even like on an inner archetypal level, you could think of the influence of other people and ideas and the healthy values that you've learned as these kind of ideas as archetypes within your mind, fighting down the demonic shadow monster ideas in your mind. You know, you have these higher self type archetypes within yourself. You could think of it as like a poetic spiritual warfare thing. That makes sense to me. You could even think of people you respect, like teachers and gurus and stuff like this. The whole like, what would Jesus do thing. Maybe your JC is Joseph Campbell. What would Joseph Campbell do?
Follow your bliss and don't be afraid.
I think it's a good thing to do anyways, is to like, if you can't get in touch with your own higher self, then maybe call upon the higher self of archetypes and philosophers and teachers and people you respect and use them as like type of angels in your life or angel archetypes in your mind to help give you guidance and strength as you walk through the valley of the shadow of death or whatever. Okay, hopefully that answers some of those questions. This is a freaking super squeaky chair. We should be on the floor, right? Floor gang. If you're ceiling gang, cringe. Get out. Unsubscribe right now. We should talk about Pewdiepie. Does anybody watch any Pewdiepie videos? He's an interesting figure, right? Probably the most popular person in the world. Also kind of problematic, right? Like, I'm not exactly sure how I feel about some of his content. He put some, like, hand signals and stuff, and some of his stuff, he seems to have some dog whistles in there sometimes. I sometimes feel like he probably does have some bad ideas that he wants to like trickle in, but he also wants to be a good boy and keep his money, stay appealing to a large demographic, and so he's kind of undercover with some of that stuff. I don't know, what do you guys think? What's up, Keith? Well, we got some John Ireland questions. He's always got good questions. Let's see what he has to say. Let's jump into it. Hope you're doing well, John. He says, people tend to identify with their thoughts, and their cognitive line of intelligence generally necessarily leads the way, and thus people tend to think, identify, assume that their overall developmental level or center of gravity is way higher than it actually is, merely because their cognitive level is the highest. Absolutely true. Should moral ethics be a more primary line of development? Can moral ethics be so clearly separated from lines like spirituality? Who are we kidding that person X is so highly spiritual when their behavior is so blatantly, ongoingly immoral? Are we way too reliant on concepts like shadow to justify, minimize, rationalize these conditions? So far, I'm totally with you. I'm following this. Let's keep reading the rest of this comment and then we'll circle back around. We tend to elevate our own or others' lines of development on the person, but what role does group association have in affecting or even determining one's level, i.e. their moral development? Maybe we don't give the social influence enough weight, or more to the point, maybe some aspects of development aren't or can't be determined by the individual, but are in fact determined by those affected, i.e. moral codes, justice system, environmental ethics. Someone has rightly noted that in-group typically discounts the assessments of out-group contending. They aren't in a position to know. Right. Regarding at least the moral line, I regard this argument as complete and utter horseshit. The more I study cognitive bias and logical fallacies, the more I agree with that assessment. What is the relationship and role of morality, ethics, between the four quadrants, especially in the light of tetra meshing? Nice. Are there base minimum degrees of meshing between the quadrants for a person to develop to the next wave stage? How much incongruity between quadrants can there be for that difference to actually prevent development? Man, that's really... This is what I love about John, right? He has always got some smart questions. And also, if you read what he's saying here, it's like he already understands what's going on, and he just wants me to like, talk about it. Because he's basically making these points, right? He's saying the cognitive line runs ahead, the moral line tends to run behind, and then we hold these people to be so spiritually awakened and mature, but then their actions aren't that good or are immoral. So yeah, people tend to have moral problems, and there's definitely this like in-group, out-group contention, like he's saying, right? Where, for example, Wilbur talks about deep science and this idea that like Buddhism can be a type of science because there's a peer review amongst a community of the adequate. People who have done the injunction count as adequate, but then he wants to basically get rid of anybody who doesn't agree with him out of the peer review and say that their opinion doesn't count until they agree with him. So that's not really a very good peer review. And yeah, so there tends to be a problem with in-group and out-group assessments like that. And I'm sure that applies to the moral thing too. But he's also talking about basically this tetra meshing, right? I like that idea. Basically, so instead of just measuring your development in terms of where you're at cognitively, he's talking about measuring your development across quadrants, right? So it's not just like, well, what ideas do I have? It's like, well, how are you living? And I think, yeah, this is where a lot of us are cognitively integral, but we don't know how to live that way. We don't know how to apply those distinctions in our life. You know, we're interested in the theory, but we haven't learned the theory enough to be able to apply it and to turn it into like habitual patterns and things in our life that are actually practical and applicable and show up in our lifestyle every day. So for example, like this depth and span utilitarian ethics. If you're not applying depth and span utilitarian ethics when you're buying stuff, you might be not really living it, not really there yet, not really fully integral in all four quadrants. So yeah, something to think about. People tend to identify with their thoughts. Should moral ethics be a more primary line of development? So yeah, I think that we can talk about people's ideas and like people like, you're intuiting these deep integral ideas, this deep integral wisdom. And that makes sense. Like he's saying, the cognitive line runs ahead. You start to understand the ideas first. But I would say he's right, that a more true measure of real arrival into these stages and being firm in them is, are you living in accord with these values in your life? Can you point to how you're applying integral ideas on the daily in your life? Like, has it become a cognitive operating system that you're running your life on? Okay, let's see what his next statement is. We got a couple more here from him. Big props to John. John's always got super wise questions and insights. As I personally explore specific meditative paths more intensely, I'm discovering that some of these interior paths, particularly non-traditional Buddhist, are as thoroughly mapped out as any exterior, very specific description of stages, factors, hindrances. Ultimately, yes, the further up the path one travels, the less formulaic and recipe-like it is, and the more experiential it gets. Right. This is like what I was just saying too. You know, it's like it's one thing to try and grasp the theory. It's a whole other thing to understand that theory in practice. Okay, back to it. And there's no one right path. Exactly. There is no one right path. But there do seem to be relative guarantees. And the interesting thing is that the more dialogue there is, and openness, and emphasis on pragmatism, the less traditional secrecy. I guess that means like reducing it to one type of sect, right? And the less emphasis on monastic or lifetimes of work required. Right, yeah, like the less like monkness and like one tradition kind of focus. The more people are both seeming to achieve and claim development and attainments and have this affirmed, confirmed. So he's saying that through practice you can attain and affirm that you have some kind of developmental realization. Sure, there's a risk of scripting people into having state experiences, but I suspect permanent trait stages are harder to mistake. My point is that I wonder if there might not be benefit to the integral emergentist movement, revolutionary movement community in emphasizing these measured paths, process of insight, to name only a few. Okay, so are there certain paths that we could emphasize that will help lead to these permanent traits and states? He's saying that if you go down these particular traditional paths and you apply the practices, that you can actually not just have experiences, but you can develop these patterns, these habits, these traits, these new ways of being through time. I guess my way of using my own examples would be something like practicing the power of now. Is it good to learn to like go down a Buddhist meditative practice, like non-traditional Buddhism? Yeah, I think that's right. I think that you can definitely get these structures in place and you can definitely learn specific interior things through going through these different practices. You know, this is why, coming back around to this first question, this is why I'm saying that no, I don't think Buddhism is enough, or no, I don't think Christianity is enough, because they all tend to have their own focus on what it is. And like if you're a Christian, if you go down a Christian path, you are unlikely to get the boons that you would get from these Buddhist paths. And honestly, you need that stuff. If you're going to be an integral practitioner, you need to have the boons that come from this mental control, that comes from these Eastern practices. You need to be able to quiet your mind and get control of your mind, and to be able to witness what's happening, to be able to like all of these practices, all these things that they're practicing on these paths, like, and what I mean, I mean like practicing, like in their life. Like these are valuable things, and yeah, they do show up as changing your life and showing up as traits and stages. That's a real thing. There is real benefit in that, but I don't think, like again, he even said there's no one right path. Exactly. So it's like, as integralists, most of us have already dabbled in this stuff. There are 6 people on here right now. Let's do a test. How many of the 6 of you have studied Buddhism or some kind of state training practice? How many of you have had a state training practice? If you've had a state training practice, post a thumbs up. Let's see those thumbs up in the comments. I'm guessing that all of you have had some kind of state training practice. Michael Slade says me. We got Christopher saying me. I know David Hartfield was in here. He knows Buddhism. He knows Christianity. He's familiar with these traditions. I'm pretty sure. Let's see. I'm gonna scroll through and see who I know. I know Kai. Kai. He's studied these practices. Christopher sitting. Good for you. That's what's up. I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like everybody in here. I mean, Michael Slade. I'm assuming yes. Brendan. I know that's the case. Every single integralist that you will meet has studied multiple traditions. Matthew, getting into meditation more. Yeah, right. So you're on it. This isn't something that you're like, I don't know what's happening over there. You know, it's like people who find integral have practiced some kind of meditation. People who find integral found Buddhism and meditation first, almost always. You know, actually, a lot of people found integral through Eastern practices or through Buddhism. Like, for example, I found integral because I found Andrew Cohen and his version of Buddhism, and I thought it was really cool because it was more practical and creative, not just constantly transcending. That's how I found Ken Wilber. I'm going to go back because I said I'd answer your question. Can there be an understanding of the theory without knowing the theory? Sometimes people intuit aspects of the theory, or they'll know it implicitly, but knowing something implicitly is different than knowing it explicitly. When you have a name for it, when it's understood in a larger context, it's a lot easier to work with it. When it's implicit, like you might be able to do some of it, but it's like less skillful because it's less conscious, if that makes sense. Let's see. I used to do enlightened communication, Chris Parrish rocks. Cool. I don't know. Enlightened communication. That sounds nice. Hey, I just want to say I appreciate everybody for hanging out. Is everybody doing good? Give me a thumbs up if you're doing good. Hope y'all are doing good. I got a lot of love for you. So like I said before, I'm still busy, I'm still on a break. I still got a lot of work to catch up on for you guys. But I missed you guys. I wanted to get on and hang out with you. It's like quarantine times. Like now is not the time for me to just be working on stuff alone, you know. I don't care if I have to pile on a couple videos to the back of the editing thing. Maybe I'll even like cut myself a little bit of slack and not edit some of these things and just put them out or something. But yeah, I think it's important in these times for people like me to get in touch with their audience and to be hanging out. Now's a great time for us to all be hanging out. You know what? I'm actually thinking about doing like some Twitch streaming. I like this guy Kenny Beats. Do you guys know Kenny Beats? Hey man, this is a practice that Andrew Cohen did. I'm surprised that you didn't do enlightened communication in the community. Well, I wasn't really in the community. I've been on the outskirts. I think a lot of us integralists end up on the outskirts of everything. Were you in the community, Christopher? Did you do enlightened communication in the community? That's kind of one of the things I like about what Andrew Cohen was doing. He talked about this like intersubjective enlightenment or whatever. The idea of like when two people who realize that they are this one without a second come together under this higher container of like we both realize that we are the universe in flux. Now we can kind of work together on these things. I was involved in a rogue group in North Carolina. Oh, that's what's up, man. I had an interview with Andrew Cohen. I've had a couple talks with him actually. He's a nice guy from my experience. I was interviewing him and I was a fan of his, so he was really nice to me. But we talked about jazz. He's a drummer. I'm a musician, so we talked about music, and he was telling me how he's trying to. I'll send you directions. Yeah, please do. Thanks, buddy. He was telling me how because he had his big drama or whatever. And we could talk about that a little bit if you want. If you guys want to talk about want me to tell you what I think about Andrew Cohen a little bit, let me know and we'll talk about that. But yeah, he says he's trying to get over some of his dogmatic stuff, his like old-fashioned guru ways of looking at things. But when I talked to him, I was kind of talking to him about like how loosely or tightly he was holding Buddhist symbolism and how seriously or literally he took that kind of stuff. And it seems like, unfortunately, he's still kind of clinging to some of the dogma around that. And he's still kind of, collapsing things into his one tradition. And it really does become a problem because people do start to take these ideas literally and they're not transcending and including. They become these people who have this dogmatic bias where they think they have the one true way. It's not really good. Did I answer your question, Christopher, about theory? Yeah. Let's see. Okay, Christopher is saying something too. I was more into the evolution of consciousness ideas and the practices that Chris Parrish created, not so much into Cohen himself. Okay, well, I'll tell you what I like about Cohen. As a person who was into Buddhism and liking a lot of the things about it, one of the things I didn't like about it was that it was really escapist and it got into spiritual bypassing a lot. And Andrew Cohen seemed to have some pretty good answers about the balance between what he called the authentic self and this idea of the other people had about the unique self. So the authentic self is this higher self archetype, this version of you that knows that it is connected to everything. It knows that we're all one, as opposed to ego, right? So for most people, it's just like, well, anytime you assert yourself, that's just ego. Well, he had this other kind of way of approaching it where it's like, okay, well, there's ego, which is this separate self sense that thinks it's separate from everyone and that acts from this place of limited selfish perspective. And then there's the authentic self who knows who and what it is in this enlightened evolutionary unfolding, and that you could participate in the creation of the universe, in evolution, participating in evolution as a spiritual practice, evolutionary spirituality.
Andrew Cohen calls his teaching evolutionary enlightenment. This new understanding of spiritual awakening redefines the pre-modern notion of enlightenment for the modern world. Now, the purpose of higher consciousness is no longer to be free from the world or go to heaven after we die, but to be an instrument for the evolutionary process itself.
In evolutionary enlightenment, the goal is not to get out of the universe. The goal is not to escape from the universe. The goal is to get into the process.
So he was much more focused on this creating perspective from an enlightened perspective. And I thought, like, this is actually one of the most balanced versions of Buddhism that I've seen. Now, I think it's kind of good to work your way in steps. Like, I guess this is kind of what John was saying before about, like, going down these paths. I think it starts with something like a practicing the power of now, kind of like mindfulness meditation, where you start to witness your mind and you start to watch your mind and you start to be like, okay, these are the patterns of my mind. Then you start to break those patterns, or like silence that voice, and then you like slowly start to gain control, to break the habitual unconscious patterns of mind, to rest in the observer and to disidentify with that talking voice in your mind. So this is a good first step. And a lot of people think that like getting to this blankness or this like no mind or this sort of like I've cleared it, like that's the goal or something. It's like, no, that's not the goal. That's like step one. To me, living an enlightened life is living a consciously created life, an artistic life, where you're consciously creating your life. It's not just witnessing the moment and going with the flow. I think that's like kind of lame, green, like early immature versions of enlightenment.
We're all experience junkies, and we're self-centered experience junkies that have a very materialistic relationship to our feeling experience, and we have to cut that out because the future needs to be created now, and we don't have any more time to sit around and enjoy the ride. We have to make something happen. Since the 60s, everybody's been talking about, be here now, and now we have the power now. It's the same old thing. I think it's the last thing we need is more be here now, because it's not enough. It's not enough. There's an urgency, I feel and I believe, that we need to embrace this, what I'm calling this creative or evolutionary principle, particularly because of the time we're living in. That's what we need to be doing. So I even feel when we talk about this stuff, we need to talk about it in such a way that's literally going to light a fire underneath us. What happens most of the time is we're all so, wound up and so uptight and so lost in our own narcissism. Someone says, calm down, transcend the mind, be in the moment. We go, we smile, and then we feel the relief, and it's, that's it. And that's not it. All we're feeling is some release from our kind of narcissistic self-obsession and just relief from, quote unquote, the burden of existence, which is so ridiculous. Because when you realize that the universe can only know itself through you and through I, it's not a burden to be alive. It's the greatest gift to be a human being, because there's only human beings that have this capacity for consciousness. A lot of the ways people think about non-traditional, very personalized spirituality is so about feeling good. And in the end, I don't think awakening is really about feeling good. I think it's about something much more important than that. And so finally, a kind of a decision has to be made, if you can permit me for saying this, for eternity. See, that's when you're really start playing in the big leagues. When it's not a choice you make, well, I think I'll make that choice in my life right now. You say, no, it's ultimately a choice in relationship to eternity.
I think this more Andrew Cohen style approach is better, but I think that you have to do the one before you can do the other. There's like stages of it. It's like an unfolding kind of thing. So again, John makes this point of like, there's no one right path, but there are these stages of practice. And knowing what they are and having tools to move through them is important. But the problem is that old-fashioned ways of talking about it can get in the way, and it can become more about the tradition and the way that we talk about it than understanding the usefulness of the practice divorced from the tradition. It's interesting, too, because with the Andrew Cohen thing, he's this Jewish guy who went to India and studied under one of these gurus. He went down this path and he became like one of the next appointed teachers in this path. And he's taken this very Eastern Indian approach. And he sees, I think, his teacher, and he sees how people in India treat his teacher, right? And the traditions there. And then he brought this stuff back to America. And then he's having people in the West treat him, a Jewish guy, as if he was one of these Indian traditional teachers, like having them prostrate or like bow before his picture in their rooms, wanting special gifts and flowers and all this stuff when he comes around. And also, like, you have to understand, you go to a guru because you want him to break your ego. You say, okay, I'm ready to die. Break my ego so I can live an enlightened life and be awake and free. So traditionally, gurus would be like, okay, you want to break your ego? Go dig your own grave and lay in it. and lay there and die, and just go dig a hole and put yourself in it. Don't get out. So like traditional Indian Eastern gurus, like they can be rough. Like those practices are like, they're about killing your ego. So like Andrew Cohen brings these practices back to the West with these people with huge egos, these sensitive people. And part of the punishment when someone does something wrong is like, he told this one lady, like, go stand in the river for 30 minutes or something like that. Which sounds like a pretty mild punishment to me. But if it's really cold, then that's really bad. I think she got like sick or, like hyperthermia or something. But maybe he didn't know that was going to happen. And I know it sounds like I'm like defending him, but I'm saying like, I would imagine often that, when you bring an Eastern traditional practice into a Western context, Western people are going to be like, oh my, I don't like this. You're not being nice to me. Like, this is like, it's like, my job is to kill you. My job is to break your ego. You're over here worrying about if I'm being nice to you. Okay, so Matthew's saying Ken Wilber seems to have a history with problematic gurus going back to Adida. Yeah, and gurus can be problematic because they will act with this kind of crazy wisdom type of stuff, and like a lot of times they'll do terrible shit under the guise of I just want to kill your ego, and that's not good. So, yeah, you're right. Ken Wilber does have a history with associating with problematic gurus because Ken Wilber has a problematic worldview. Ken Wilber favors this one tradition, and so do all these gurus that he points to, and they end up having the problems of these traditions. This is the problem with bad integration, is that you bring a lot of the unhealthy problems of your tradition along with you. If you haven't really transcended and deconstructed, there's going to be some serious problems. Okay, hold on. Gurus are ethnocentric answer to that which is beyond the known. Just a hypothesis. I think guides and teachers, teachers, gurus, are somewhat helpful and necessary. I definitely had one, and it was helpful to me to look up to them. I mean, it wasn't like official or like part of a lineage or part of a tradition or whatever, but I do think it's important for us to really value our teachers and to, I mean, in some sense, see them as like when they're really doing their best, like God's light is shining through them in some kind of way. And if we can see what we really value about them and integrate some of that into us, that's great. Because what we value in them is things that we aspire to in ourselves. So when we see that in someone else, when we see examples, when we see role models, that can be really helpful. But at the end of the day, they just point the way. That's why they say when you see a Buddha on the path, you have to kill him. Ultimately, the point is not to bow before an image of your teacher or to worship your teacher. It's to assimilate what your teacher has to give you, and then, if anything, to go beyond your teacher. As a person who's been a teacher or a guru and some of this kind of stuff, I would be super proud of students of mine who do better than me. Yeah, the teaching cancels out the teacher. You start out with this more hierarchical approach, and it's helpful for them to look up to you and to mirror what you're doing a little bit. But then at a certain point, they get what they can get from you, and they assimilate what you bring to the table, and they take it and move on. Each one teach one, and then they become a teacher for someone else on the path. Third question from John. John's always so good with the questions. I've already complimented his questions every time, but man, they're always good. Third question, in terms of assessing ongoing development of lines of intelligence, how many of us have done any sort of formal psychograph? I haven't. I suspect most of us have just read some Wilbur books, looked at a few charts, and then ballparked it. A few of us may have even gone the extra recommended steps of assessing our strongest and weakest lines, with goal being to shore up the weakest lines as it is the dead weight that's holding everything else back and down. Not that we want a pissing contest, but in the sense of including the rational, it seems to me we should be emphasizing this work a lot more and not just assuming things all over the place. And if this integral psychograph can't be assessed for free or minimal, that should be a short or midterm goal, no? Maybe it's much simpler than I'm assuming, but I don't find it at all straightforward assessing communication line or emotional line or sexual line, let alone which combo of these lines to equate as minimum base for a self line. Some would suggest we need to go to these independent experts for these assessments. That's great. I was actually recently thinking about the idea of doing assessments, one-on-one assessments. I was thinking about it because I did those kinds of assessments of Ken Wilber, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, and I talked about how they relate to development, what they got, what they don't got, what they still need to learn, where their weak spots are, this kind of stuff. The problem with this is I know that as soon as I'm like, hey, I'll do assessments for you, the people are going to be like, oh, David, who do you think you are that you can do this? I just feel like people are going to be like, oh, David. And then, on the backside of this, people are going to be like, oh, it's just about ranking. The point of doing an assessment is for your own self. It's not to feel like you're smarter than other people or better than other people or anything like that, or to compare yourself with others. The point of doing this kind of assessment, like he's saying, is to figure out where you still have room to go, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. And like to work with someone like me who's a coach or a tutor who can go through a bunch of different lines with you and see kind of where you're at and give you some ideas on the back end of this kind of a talk to figure out, well, what are some things that you could study to get better at this line? Or what are some ways that you could use this line to help this line? Or like what are some blind spots that you might not have had and what are some practices for that? Right? So integral assessments actually would be super helpful for people, I think. It could be done in a violent and dangerous and unhealthy way, but I would think that if it was in the context of like you don't get a grade, you don't get points or something like this, but if it was like for you to figure out kind of where you're at and to figure out what's next for you and what you need to work on. So hey, If you would be interested in an integral assessment, hit me up. And on the back end of something like this, John, to better answer your question and not just to talk about this idea that I have, I'm thinking that if I do enough of these integral assessments, if I figure out what kind of questions I'm going to ask and all this kind of stuff, that's probably a step in the direction of a more systematized or programmed assessment tool. But I think it's going to be something kind of like Briggs-Myers kind of tests where it's like, I really don't think that the public versions of the test, like if you just like fill in the blank style, are really going to be able to be that accurate for you. I could be wrong. We'd have to test it and see. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is the kind of thing where you have to really talk to a person and they have to ask you why and listen to you talk. And it might be something like that where you actually need some interaction and some ability to have somebody who knows what they're looking for to make a discernment about some of that stuff. But again, I'm just speculating, but I do think something like that would be helpful. Does that sound like something any of y'all would be interested in? Would any of y'all be interested in an integral assessment where we went through the different quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types and kind of assessed where you're at in your progress with these different things and what you might need to work on and where you could go next and that stuff? Would any of y'all do that? What's a good price for that anyways? Like, should I charge the same thing as I charge for my like tutoring sessions, like $60 an hour or something, like $100 for an integral assessment or something like this? What do you guys think? Alexander says, while I've done heaps of typing tests and certainly stated my own lines and stages, I've never come across any line stage psychograph tests or systems to follow. Since there is a risk of stating one's self higher than we are, it would be helpful to have this kind of automated process. Yeah, part of the problem with this too is that there's disagreement even within our community about what's going on at higher stages, right? So if you're, for example, hiring like me versus Wilbur to do this assessment, Wilbur is going to measure your progress from his Buddhist assumptions in light of his Buddhist perspective, and he's going to be thinking about like his third and fourth tier Aurobindo type of measurements, around this stuff. And I'm not. So it's interesting, definitely the worldview of the person who is doing the thing. It's going to be understood within the context of the worldview of the person assessing. And so you really have to trust the perspective of the assessor, or at least realize that you're getting it in that context. But the difference between my perspective and Wilbur's perspective is that he seems to be coming from a very specifically Buddhist view, and he has a lot of unfounded claims, and my focus is more broad and wide, and probably more like real healthy integral, even based on Wilberian standards. And, my view has a lot more intellectual honesty. I'm not making claims beyond anyone's ability to know or anything like that. Okay, so it looks like we've dealt with these Q's and A's, and yeah, we're doing good. We're done. Does anyone else have any more questions or anything like that? Anyone? Oh, I was talking about Twitch streaming. And Kenny Beats. There's this Twitch streamer I like, this YouTuber I like, his name is Kenny Beats, and he gets on Twitch and he produces beats and he talks. I was thinking like maybe once a week or like a couple times a week, like maybe I would do like a Twitch stream and get on there and make some music myself and maybe talk about philosophy. So it would be kind of like this, except for I would be making a beat over the course of like a couple hours, maybe like, working on some music and stuff, and you could be sending me in questions and we could be talking about stuff as we go. Would any of y'all come watch me if I was doing that Twitch stream stuff? Is that something any of you guys would be interested in? Kai says it would be interesting to have a sense of direction while developing so that you can have a more balanced growth. Sense of direction. Yeah, that's the good thing about the integral map, is that it's supposed to like give us some kind of stats. If life is a video game, you want to be able to like pull up your character stats and see the different lines and like your progress. You're like, I'm a level 25 in Spiral Wizard or whatever it is. I need to build up this line so that way I can defeat the dragon on level 7 or whatever it is. Thank you, but not interested in assessment. Being assessed by a certain narrative is to submit to the assessment of the model of the narrator or not. Yeah, but Christopher, that's inevitable. So if you're not interested in an assessment because it's coming from a certain perspective, I'm wondering, who do you think has a perspective from nowhere? That's why you have to understand the thing in context, and you got to find somebody who you think is intellectually honest and rigorous and actually in touch with truth to do the assessment. Because there's nobody who doesn't have a background, a limited framework from which they're working. At least a healthy integral framework should be well-founded and sound. Integral Review Live would be a lot better on Twitch, says Alyosha. That's probably right. Maybe that's where we should do it. Let's try that, Alyosha. Maybe we could get it going. Yeah. So I'm still hanging out a little bit and seeing what other kind of comments or questions might trickle in before I get off. Hey, did y'all see that Kai and I put out another spotlight video? That's like what we're doing here in our local town with some of this local talent for our video production company. Yeah. Alyosha says he's totally supporting the Twitch idea. I think it would be good because it might be nice to like get off into different platforms. So it might be a good way to plug into a different community. Maybe you can talk about future projects, what you were planning to do in the next couple of months. Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay, well, first of all, Alyosha and I have a couple projects that we're working on. We read Sam Harris's wife's book about consciousness, and we're going to do an integral review live on that, or integral review, I'm not sure live or not. Chris says, thank you for all you do, David. It's so good to see you doing so well. Cheers, brother. Cheers, man. Much love to you. Stay safe, man. Great hanging out with you today. So Alyosha and I have this integral review project coming out. I have a vlog coming out soon from my trip up to see my family in Vermont. That's maybe some of y'all don't care about that because it's more personal. It's not so integral related, but that's something. I have this talk with Hansi in the works. I'm just editing it. Lots of things that are getting edited. Lots of past work that's just having to still be edited. Probably another Q&A coming out. Basically, like I said before, I'm kind of on a break still trying to catch up on a lot of old work that I did last year that I didn't have time to finish and edit. I'm really trying to get caught up. So things like doing this video right now are like adding stuff to the back of my pile of things to have to work on. So a lot of, I feel like life is about like trying stuff and then refining and figuring it out over time. And that's kind of what I've been doing even with this project with you guys, is like I'm just trying to figure out how to do it and how to do it sustainably. And even though I'm like, okay, I'm on a break, you know, Bruce Alderman hits me up and he's like, hey, I'm doing this thing on the integral stage about the future of religion. I'm like, well, I got to do that. I have to, I have to make one of these videos for this. Layman hit me up. He's like, let's do this talk. There's been drama in the community. So I did a Q&A in Integral Global. There was this drama with Keith, and so I made a video about Keith. So I mean, I've been responding to some of the stuff that's happening in the zeitgeist and like trying to make some new stuff here and there as I need to. But actually right now I'm still trying to get caught up on a lot of old stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I would still like to make for y'all. Like I have ideas for future projects. But yeah, I mean, I'm still, like I said, trying to get caught up on a lot of old stuff. I would like to do another meme review, another Integral meme review here again soon. That's fun. That's a fun one to do. So I'm going to, throughout this year, I'm probably going to do a video here or a video there that'll be new, but I imagine that I'll also be trying to get caught up on a lot of stuff from the past. So hopefully by the end of this year, I'll be mostly caught up. Matthew, let's see, just recently found your videos more interesting than a lot of integral life videos where they just talk about how integral they are, joking about that, but feels like that, yeah, sometimes, for sure. No, I totally agree. Respect too, brother. Like I'm really trying to be kind of like an alternative to that sort of stuff. The whole like touchy-feely thing about the integral life stuff is like, it feels still kind of green, right? Where it's like, hey everybody, sunshine and light. You know, the world is going to be perfect and beautiful and everything's flowers and bubbles and we never disagree. Like we only have people on and we talk about how integral we already are. And everyone agrees. Isn't that so nice? There's never any disagreements or debates or any kind of like friction. It's all just so flowers and sunshine and rainbows all the time. A lot of it feels very out of touch with reality, like kind of up in its own like ivory tower, like kind of detached from the regular poor, the working class struggles and like the suffering in the world. On this whole like, you know what, all you got to do is become a Buddhist and meditate, and then that, like that's the answer to everything. I'm glad to open up a can of criticism on those guys. But yeah, respect, man. I'm trying to make integral fun. I'm trying to make it cool. I'm trying to make it accessible. And I'm trying to bring a little bit of friction and engagement and like allow for there to be disagreement and debate within our spaces. And yeah, to make it more fun and interesting and young and not just a bunch of old white people sitting around talking about how integral and enlightened they are. You know, it's horrible when they said Star Wars The Last Jedi was integral. Don't get me started on the free will thing. Yeah, I've listened to lots of the Daily Evolver and stuff like that. And man, there have been so many times where I've just been like upset. I'm like, they are misrepresenting integral. They are misrepresenting what it is. Like they're getting the distinctions wrong. Like honestly, as a person who cares about integral, as a person who identifies as integral in public, as a person who points a lot of people in the integral direction, who's like a representative and a teacher of integral, a leader in this community, I find a lot of their stuff to be embarrassing. And that's part of why I'm critical of it. A lot of it is very cringe. I don't know if you guys saw this recent ContraPoints video about Cringe, but it was really good. ContraPoints is one of my favorite YouTubers. I really like the aesthetic presentation. It's not just, here's ideas, here's philosophy. It's like, here's a dialogue, almost like a Platonic dialogue, showing these different archetypes and how they would argue it out. She really is good at this, not just telling you, but showing you, which is something that I try to do as well. And I find her work to be really inspiring. Let's see, I also am going to do a talk soon with Stephanie. I don't know if y'all saw her. She joined the group lately. Let's see, will you do a video on the Daily Evolver? For a minute, I tried to do a podcast with a friend of mine, Andrew Waite, called The Integral Revolver.
Integral Revolver.
And it was going to be like a podcast that listened to and criticized episodes of The Daily Evolver. But man, there's so much to criticize. I actually stopped listening a while back. But I'll tell you what, man, if there's a particular episode of The Daily Evolver or something that you want me to comment on or something like that, post it in the group and I'll check it out and see if I can either make up a short live video about it or like post something about it or post a comment about it. Basically, my main criticism with a lot of that Daily Evolver stuff is that there still seems to be a lot of pre-trans confusion. And that's like the main thing I'm always on about. It's like one of my main things in the community. It was like one of the main reasons that made me feel like integral community was my community in the first place, was that we were making these distinctions between what's metaphorically of value in these religious traditions and what's literally true. And you see people like Jeff Salzman, is that his name? Yeah, he has Wilbur on, and he's talking to him about psychics and magic, and he has Steve McIntosh on, and he's acting like his talk about a belief in a personal, literal Christian God is like deep, or that there's like some kind of a compatibility between these kinds of traditions. They just seem to be drinking the Kool-Aid really hard. Yeah, he did do that interview with Frank Visser. It was a pretty good one. Matthew, to be honest with you, I don't know if any of those guys want to put me on. I think a lot of them think of me as like a shit starter. Unfortunately, Matthew, there's not a lot of healthy engagement with critics. But that talk with Frank Visser was really good. You know what, Matthew? Actually, and other people in the group too, hit him up. Hit up Jeff Salzman or some of these other people and let him know that you want me to go on. I'll go on. I'll go talk to him. I'd gladly talk to him. But yeah, I would gladly go on the Daily Evolver. I'd gladly go on any of these shows. I would love to debate Steve McIntosh. He was supposed to debate me. He backed out. I would love to see Wilbur in a debate. Like he probably wouldn't debate me because I'm not like a professional academic philosopher, like not a serious book writing philosopher, not like, some of these older white men or something, my beard isn't white enough. I'm not old enough. I haven't written enough books or something like that. But yeah, if Wilbur wouldn't consider me pure enough to debate, I would debate him on a panel with people like Frank Visser and some other people. I think, what I would love to do? I would love to have Corey DeVos and Ken Wilber and me and Frank Visser and do like hot ones, Socratic questioning, where we take turns each wing, spicier wings and even spicier questions all the way down. Wouldn't that be cool? Integral hot ones debate.
You're watching Hot Ones. It's the show with hot questions and even hotter wings.
Tag teaming the wings of death here.
Oh shit.
You spoke about Salzman before, though, right? Years ago. Yeah, like I said, I did that Integral Revolver, and I think I released a clip of it. Not really sure if I ever fully finished that podcast and put it out. I think it was getting to be really long, and we were having a hard time finding a frame for it. I'd love to see that Hot Ones. Yeah, me too. That'd be the best Hot Ones, right? Like Integral Hot Ones. But yeah, if you watch my Steve McIntosh video, Integral Integrity and Steve McIntosh, you can see some clips of Salzman and McIntosh talking, and Steve McIntosh is like talking about the experience of the love of God and all this kind of stuff, and Jeff Salzman's just like, whoa, cool. Like a total freaking wide-eyed idiot cult member.
I notice as I'm hearing you talk that there's a little thrill sensation arising in my body and in my psyche, because to see this values gravity towards goodness, truth, and beauty just built into the system, and to see how it's been unfolding, not only in the culture at large, but also in my own life and in history and in the whole history of the cosmos. It's starting to feel like there's not only an intelligence behind it, but also a love, or there's also a loving intelligence or a personality at work here. And I wonder how this view can actually provide the basis of a deep spiritual life and practice that is postmodern, is post-mythic, where the scientific truth of evolution can be the basis for an authentic spiritual path.
Yes, indeed. I mean, and I thanks for bringing that up. So we're like the portal that brings the infinite through into the finite. Human consciousness, because of its recognition of these elements of infinity, the beauty, the true, and the good, as that light shines into the phenomenal world, the finite world, we see it as these values. And as our consciousness evolves, as the opening widens, we are able to see presence of the infinite with increasing depth and clarity. And this, in a sense, is sort of the new truth of evolutionary spirituality that's revealed by our understanding of evolution itself.
Wow.
So
cool.
Yeah.
It's nice, the idea of wanting to practically show how integral ideas work in the world. And he gets stuff right. He gets a lot of stuff right. He says a lot of good things. He says a lot of things that I agree with. But it's like the more agreement that you have with someone, the more those areas of disagreement show up as mattering. And you could be like 90% on board with what a person is saying, but then like really annoyed at the way that 10% of the time they are totally blowing it and getting it wrong. That 10% can just be overwhelming, especially if you really care about the subject matter. This is the video David was pointing at. Yeah, the addressing. Thanks for sharing that, Alyosha. Yeah, that's one of the first integral videos that I made. It's still early days. I would suggest that if you guys watch that video, that you watch it on like 1.25 speed. I'm also sharing like lots of clips for context in that video. What's messed up is that you share videos like this in the integral community, right? And you're like, okay, I'm not going to put words in anyone's mouth. I'm not going to straw man anybody. I'm going to let them speak for themselves. I'm going to show videos of them saying it. I'm going to share the full-length video of them talking about all this stuff for context. And I'm going to do my due diligence to really make sure that this person's not misrepresented. And then you share that video, and then people are like, these clips are, you're editing them. This is out of context. You're misrepresenting this person. It's like, no, I'm not. You go out of your way to give the most accurate quote possible of like literally showing a video of a person saying something with a link back to the original context in which they said it. And people will still be like, you're lying. You edited this. I guess if you're really committed to wanting to dismiss critics, even when they're talking about the actual point, that you'll just dismiss critics regardless and find some reason to dismiss what they're saying. You know what I mean? A lot of the people who are really dismissive aren't engaging with the points at all. Like, they're completely dishonest. And to see such dishonest bullshit and such like bad actors in an integral community is really disheartening. Really disheartening. Man, it has been great hanging out with y'all. I'm not even in a rush to get off. I just like chilling with you guys. Let's see. I'm checking to see if there's anything else. Y'all check out Luke's videos. He's been making these videos now. I mean, big props to people who are taking this time to do things creative and to share that stuff. So big up, Luke. I hope you're doing well, brother. Alyosha and I, our Power of Myth podcast, part 1, just passed 20,000 views. Super proud of that. Most views on any video that I've made so far, so that's pretty great. Your process is totally unique, David. It shows your artistry. You will notice the more you advance, the more people will criticize you because of your bright. Thanks, man. Yeah, it's something I'm having to cope with a little bit too, because I kind of see what I do as an alternative to the integral life stuff, as our buddy Matthew was talking about. I kind of want my stuff to be a little bit as an alternative to the integral life content. So one of the things that I'm doing also is like I'm trying to, I kind of define myself in opposition a little bit to Wilbur. Like, Wilbur won't face any of his critics. And I kind of value this much more like man of the people, like democratic style of leadership, where it's like, I don't think I'm the one or anything like that. I'm just a leader in the community, and there are other leaders, and I try to be accessible. Like, I want to be able to get on here with you and answer your questions. Like, if people post something or have criticisms or want to engage, I want to be able to get in the comments and engage with them. But on the other hand, I guess the pro of not engaging with some of these people is that a lot of times these people drag you down into the dirt and make you look bad for even engaging with them, for even taking them and their bad comments made in bad faith seriously. You show that you don't value your time. So this is something I'm kind of having to, as I get a little bit more popular, trying to figure out like what comments are the ones that are worth investing in and which ones I should just totally ignore and not even like don't feed the trolls kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So this is something I'm trying to get better at. And slowly, I'm putting up more boundaries and trying to take my time more seriously and to do things better in this way and not feed the trolls. And yeah, so it's something I'm working on. Here's something I can say. This is your group. This is your community. This isn't just my group. I know it's I Am David Long Friends and Fans group or whatever, but this is our space. So if y'all make art, if y'all are working on videos, if y'all want to share stuff with the community, post it in the group. If you want to go live, like I'm going live in the group and talk about stuff, whatever you want to share, whatever you want to get going, like treat this group like it's your group. Treat people in here with the integral respect that I talk about in the intro video to the group pinned at the top of the page. But for the most part, this is your community. So If you got something that you want to share that you think that the rest of us would value, some music, some poetry, some painting, some video, whatever kind of content that you might create, some writing, some articles, whatever it is, share it. This is a good place to share it, to get some good feedback on that stuff. Big props to people like Luke, like Julian, who are posting stuff in the group. Y'all can do that too. I got much love for this community. Thanks to everybody for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Support me on Patreon. All the things. Ring the bell. Peace.